So the second part of my presentation today has to do with the education and reception, often referred to as the E&R process. And I want to talk a little bit about what the Committee on Education and Reception is and what its mandate is. It is a standing committee of the Life and Mission Agency. It reports to General Assembly through the LMA on everything else except for its recommendations about applicants. Those it takes directly to the General Assembly, but everything else having to do with, for example, policy or guidelines or revisions, that sort of thing, that goes to the Life and Mission Agency first. The role of the Committee on the Education and Reception is to equip the General Assembly for its decisions concerning those seeking to enter ordained ministry into the Presbyterian Church in Canada through non-standard pathways. We talked about the standard pathway earlier in the candidacy process. Presbyteries alone have the authority to receive ministers and certify candidates. In our system, the presbytery has that authority and has that power. However, the presbyteries require permission from the General Assembly to exercise that authority with respect to ministers and candidates for ministry coming into the denomination through these non-standard pathways. The Committee on Education and Reception meets twice a year, once in April and once in November. And the committee's recommendations go to General Assembly for approval, but the committee has power to issue under certain conditions. So the time lag is sometimes a source of frustration for some. If the committee meets in November and it makes a recommendation to General Assembly with respect to a particular application, that application will not be dealt with until General Assembly meets in June of the following year. So the education and reception process, simply because of the decision-making bodies that are involved, can sometimes be, most often be, a lengthy one. There are three types of applications to E&R. The first are ordained ministers in other denominations seeking eligibility to be received as ministers in the Presbyterian Church in Canada. The second are non-ordained Master of Divinity graduates who've received their MDiv from a non-PCC theological college, and they are seeking eligibility for certification for ordination in our denomination. The third is individuals between 35 and 65 years of age who do not have an undergraduate degree, which is required in the standard pathway, but they want to become ministers in the Presbyterian Church in Canada, and they're seeking to become General Assembly Special Courses students. So these are the three types of applications that we get to E&R. The applicants submit required documentation. They have to submit the application form, and in the application form, there's a lot of personal and background information, and they're also asked to write responses to 3 questions on their understanding of their vocation for ministry. The committee, the application includes original copies of all academic transcripts of all post-secondary degrees. The committee seeks 3 confidential references, and the references are sent directly to the E&R committee, so they're not sent through the person who is applying, making the application. If the applicant is living in Canada, and this is required, the endorsement of one of our presbyteries, the presbytery within the bounds where the candidate is living. And if the candidate, the applicant rather, is ordained, then proof of ordination, we need to know what your ordaining denomination and body is, and we need a letter of standing from that ordaining denomination. If the applicant was ordained in one denomination and then transferred to another denomination before making an application to E&R, we ask to see proof of ordination and letters of standing from each of the denominations that the individual has served in. Now, and this is really important, there is no guarantee that an application will be approved. And why it's important is because sometimes, and I guess we'll get into this in a little bit, ministers in particular from outside the denomination will be scanning the pulpit vacancies page on our website and say, well, this congregation looks like a good one to apply to. I think I'm going to throw my hat into the ring. And the minister, and sometimes even the interim moderators and search committees and presbyteries may or may not be aware that they shouldn't even be looking at a candidate until they've gone through this education and reception process. And there's any application, there's no guarantee that it will be approved. The Committee on Education and Reception, I think there may be a perception in some quarters that it just rubber stamps things. It's just kind of a hoop to jump through, and that's not true. The E&R committee has a significant role and responsibility in discerning whether or not the applicants will make good candidates or good ministers in the Presbyterian Church in Canada. So that leads to this. Interim moderators and search committees, take note. Who can interim moderators and search committees consider as candidates for pulpit vacancies? And this is straight black letter law from our Book of Forms. No one is eligible for a call but a minister or a candidate certified for ordination of this church in good standing, or a settled pastor of another church that holds the same doctrine, government, and discipline as this church, and this is understood to apply to persons approved for reception under the Declaratory Act. So, ordained non-Presbyterian Church in Canada ministers seeking eligibility to be received into our denomination must go through the E&R process first before they can be considered. And non-ordained MDiv graduates from other colleges seeking eligibility for certification for ordination must go through the E&R process first to be eligible to be considered for a pulpit vacancy. On occasion, we have seen this happen where a congregation has called a minister, permitted the minister to start working in the congregation, and then, yeah, you have to make an application through education and reception. So they get the cart before the horse. And it is extremely unwise to have that situation happen because there is no guarantee that an E&R application will be approved. We've had some situations where a minister has been permitted, or a ministry candidate has been permitted to start working in a congregation in advance of going through the education reception process. They have started building pastoral ties and relationships in the congregation, and the Committee on Education and Reception has said no. And then it gets awkward, to say the least. So one of the things that it is exceedingly important to communicate to presbyteries and to interim moderators is be aware that if that really good-looking minister from the Church of Scotland has made an application to the pulpit vacancy, the first thing that you do is thank them, and the second thing you do is say you need to make an application to the Committee on Education and Reception to be received, for eligibility to be received as one of our ministers before we can even consider you. Ordained ministers seeking eligibility to be received. What is the process that they go through? First, to expand on what I was saying earlier, the ordained minister must be in a recognized Christian denomination and be able to provide proof of ordination and a letter attesting to being a minister in good standing. Not all ministers who apply are going to have their ordination recognized as being valid by the Presbyterian Church in Canada. Sometimes we get applications from ministers who were ordained by the independent congregation, which is not tied to any denomination. And the congregation basically said, yeah, we want you to be our minister, and so we're going to ordain you. There are organizations that exist solely to provide ministerial credentials to anyone who wants them and who can send a letter in, I guess, and pay a fee for it. Those we will question. So what we look for is someone that it is a recognized denomination who is, and that denomination is able to provide proof of the ordination and that they're a minister in good standing. The letter about being a minister in good standing is important too. If a denomination is unable to provide it because the minister is under some sort of discipline, if the minister has been had their ministerial credentials revoked for misconduct or some other reason, we would look into that, and that would certainly be a factor. So all of these things are important for the committee to do its due diligence. If the ordained minister is living in Canada, they must obtain the endorsement of one of our presbyteries. So we will occasionally have someone say, I want to be a minister in your denomination, and we'll say, what presbytery have you connected with? And they'll say, well, I haven't connected with any presbytery. Well, you need to do that then, because so there's a process whereby the minister will have to be known by and interviewed by the presbytery. And if the presbytery is satisfied, they will endorse the minister's application. And the motion that would be the presbytery would approve is that the presbytery of whatever endorse the application of Reverend whatever the minister's name is to the Committee on Education and Reception for eligibility to be received as a minister in the Presbyterian Church in Canada. So it's kind of a template motion, a stock motion. The minister will, with all of this, once all of this documentation is received and the presbytery endorsement, if the minister is living in Canada, meet with the members of the committee. The committee will interview them. If the committee recommends that they not be eligible to be received, then their application is denied at that point. If the committee recommends that they be eligible to be received, then the recommendation goes on to General Assembly for approval. The committee's work is advisory. We advise General Assembly, and the General Assembly makes that final decision. There is one exception to this, where the minister comes from a Reformed denomination that shares the same doctrine, government, and discipline as our own. E&R committee has power to issue with respect to the recommendation. So the recommendation doesn't have to go to General Assembly. The committee can acts as a commission, General Assembly here. For example, a minister from the Church of Scotland, from the PCUSA, from the Presbyterian Church in Korea, Tonghap. They are 3 example denominations that share the same doctrine, governance, and discipline as our own. So applications from these ministers don't have to go to General Assembly. The committee has power to issue. There's a 2-month competent objection period. So if E&R meets and they make a recommendation that an applicant be eligible, the presbyteries are circularized. A letter is sent out from the committee to every presbytery asking for if the presbyteries have any competent objections. Do you have any information about their professional or personal conduct that the committee may not have that may be relevant to whether or not their application should be approved by General Assembly? And presbyteries have 2 months in the case of ministers to bring that information to the committee's attention. Ordained non-PCC ministers who are meeting with the committee. The recommendations from the committee have conditions attached to them. And these are conditions that the applicant must fulfill before they are eligible to be received as a minister. They must complete courses in the Presbyterian Church in Canada's history and polity, and quite possibly other courses assigned by the Education and Reception Committee. For example, if the minister comes out of a non-reformed tradition, then the committee may, after going over their documentation and interviewing them, the committee may be of the opinion that the individual should take some additional courses in Reformed theology, Reformed worship and sacraments, and will recommend that those courses be part of the condition. So the applicant has to take these courses as assigned by E&R to fulfill the conditions. Of late, we've been asking applicants to complete a training in the sexual abuse and sexual harassment policy. And this is something that ministry and church vocations can do easily online where requested. So it's not an onerous requirement, but we believe it's an important one. And only after all of the conditions are fulfilled can the minister seek a call in the Presbyterian Church in Canada. So after they've completed their coursework, after they've satisfied all the conditions, then and only then can they seek a call. There is an exception. Interim privileges sometimes are extended to ministers from sibling Reformed denominations with the same doctrine, government, and discipline as our own, who are assigned only history and polity courses. So no additional courses, just the history and the polity. They can seek a call to one of our congregations. The call can proceed up to the point where it would be placed in the minister's hands, at which point the presbytery tables the call. So this is analogous to what happens with graduating students who haven't yet graduated. They're eligible to seek a call, but the call proceeds conditional upon graduation, and it's tabled until the student graduates. In this case, it's placed in the minister's hand. Presbytery tables the call. The minister can start working in the congregation and is received by the presbytery and put on the appendix to the presbytery's roll. And the minister has 1 year to complete the history and polity courses. And when the courses are completed, the presbytery can lift the call from the table and deal with it, process it in the usual way. The minister can be inducted, and the minister's name can be placed on the constituent roll. So these interim privileges are only extended to a very sort of narrow class of ministers. Same doctrine, governance, and discipline, and only assigned history and polity as their educational requirement. Okay, that's been a lot of stuff. So let's maybe pause at this point for comments and questions.
First of all, Tim, this is great stuff. Thank you so much for doing it. It's going to be greatly helpful to us out here in the Presbytery of Westminster, and I trust other presbyteries and colleges as well. I've got a couple of questions. Is there a list available to us of churches that hold the same doctrine, government, and discipline as this church, to use the official language?
Yeah, I have a list. MCV has a list. We try and update it and keep it as current as possible as some changes are made. For example, one of the things that we look for in terms of the same doctrine is, does the denomination ordain women as ministers of Word and Sacrament?
Yeah.
And some Reformed denominations that did not have relatively recently started ordaining ministers, women as ministers, and so they now fit the criteria where they didn't before.
Right.
And so we try and keep an updated list. That's the long answer. The short answer, Brian, is yes.
and is that list available on MCV's website, section of the website?
It's not available on the website, but if someone were to email me and say, do we have a list of these? And I get that request frequently, and
oh, good.
I'm happy to share it.
All right. Thank you. That's great.
Okay. All right. Other questions or comments? Then we'll carry on.
Great, Tim. I'm going to need to bow out in just a couple of minutes for another meeting, but really appreciate all your good work here. And it's always a pleasure having the refresher. So thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, you're most welcome. Okay, then I want to talk a bit about the second category of application that we get through the education and reception process. These are non-ordained MDiv graduates who have done their theological education at another theological college, not one of our PCC colleges, but another college. And they are seeking eligibility for certification for ordination in our denomination. So the first thing is they have to enter our entire candidacy process. They have to go through our candidacy process and be certified candidates for ministry. So that means they have to meet with a session and be interviewed by a session, be recommended to their presbytery, be certified by their presbytery, attend a guidance conference, take the psych testing. And they have to be a member of one of our congregations for at least 1 year before they can approach the session with the request for to be considered as a candidate for ministry. In addition to this, they have to be a member of one of our congregations for at least 2 years before making an application to the Committee on Education and Reception. So we've got two parallel processes going on here. The candidacy process, which they have to take like anyone else who's coming into becoming a minister in the standard pathway. But then they have to make an application to Education and Reception, and they have to be a member of one of our congregations for at least 2 years before making the application. And the rationale for this is one of the assumptions here is that they may not have had any significant exposure to or experience in our congregations in the Presbyterian Church in Canada. And so getting to know what it's like, our ethos, our character, who your colleagues in ministry would be, how we do things in the Presbyterian Church in Canada. That's an important part of sort of of the denominational formation, if you will. And so someone in this category, we require them to be a minister or sorry, a member of one of our congregations for at least 2 years so that they can become familiar with the Presbyterian Church in Canada before they make their application. They must obtain the endorsement of the presbytery within whose bounds they are living. And the motion here, if the presbytery, once the presbytery interviews them and is satisfied with them as a candidate for ministry, is that the presbytery endorse the application to the Committee on Education and Reception. This is a separate recommendation from certification as a candidate for ministry. So the presbyteries will need to make 2 different distinct recommendations. One is to certify them as a candidate for ministry. The second is to endorse their application to the Committee on Education and Reception. Because as I say, you've got two tracks happening here, 2 parallel processes happening. The applicant will meet with the committee once again as soon as the committee has received all of their documentation and had a chance to look it over. They're interviewed by the committee, and again, if the committee recommends that they not be eligible to be received, their application is denied. If the committee recommends they be eligible to be received, then the recommendation goes to General Assembly for approval. In this case, there is a 3-month competent objection period. So presbyteries, a letter goes out from the committee to all presbyteries requesting any information, if they have it, about professional and personal conduct that the committee may not have, that the committee should know. And these E&R recommendations, they always have conditions attached. And in this case, the applicant must complete courses in Presbyterian Church history, Presbyterian Church in Canada polity, and possibly other courses assigned by Education and Reception. And they must complete a sexual abuse and sexual harassment policy training. And only after the conditions are fulfilled can the candidate seek a call in the Presbyterian Church in Canada. The third category of application that goes to E&R are individuals who have no undergraduate degree between the ages of 35 and 65 years, but who are requesting General Assembly's permission to enter to go on to take a Master of Divinity, but without the prerequisite bachelor's degree, and to become a General Assembly Special Courses student. These individuals as well must enter the entire candidacy process. So again, meet with their session, recommendation to presbytery, presbytery certification, guidance conference, psychological testing, all of the parts of the standard candidacy process they will have to do. They also have to obtain the endorsement of a presbytery for their application to the Education Reception Committee. And again, the motion is a pretty standard one. And again, this is a separate motion from the presbytery's motion to certify them as a candidate for ministry. They will, as is the case, meet with the committee, who has reviewed once again the material that they have submitted, and the committee will interview them. If the committee recommends a no, their application is denied. If the committee recommends yes, their application goes to General Assembly for approval. And there's a a difference in the number of courses that are typically assigned. For applicants between 35 and 40 years of age, the recommendation generally is 2 full years, 20 semester courses in arts, followed by 3 full years, 60 semester courses in theology for Master of Divinity. Now, to put that in perspective, what it does is basically it takes 1 year off of a 3-year BA program. So they're doing 2 years of arts rather than 3 years. And then they would do the full Master of Divinity program. If they are between 41 and 59 years of age, they do 1 full year or 10 semester courses in arts, then followed by the standard 3 full years of the Masters of Divinity program. So what I did was I did an type of applications chart that sort of lays out every applicant, regardless of what category they fall in. If they live in Canada, they must get a presbytery endorsement, the endorsement of the presbytery within the bounds of which they're living. All the candidates, except for ministers who are already ordained, have to undergo our candidacy. The reason why we don't ask ordained ministers to undergo a candidacy process is because we trust that their ordaining body they've already gone through their own denomination's candidacy process, and we trust that process, so they don't have to do it twice. Once again, that's been a lot of information. So let's pause so you can catch your breath a bit and ask questions or make comments.
Tim, is that sexual abuse and sexual harassment training resource available, for example, to congregations from ministry and church vocations?
It is.
And
I am happy to Zoom to whatever location is requiring that training and lead it.
Okay, that's great.
One of the silver linings and unanticipated blessings that has come out of the pandemic is ministry and church vocations has had to move an awful lot of what it has done online, and that's why I'm flying all the way out west by way of Zoom to lead this workshop today. So I can do it for the sexual abuse and sexual harassment trainings as well.
That's great. And has it been recorded yet and available asynchronously?
I don't think it has.
And would you be willing?
I'm happy to do that, certainly.
Great. So because I know one of the difficulties we've had at Brentwood in terms of the training in this presbytery is that we just didn't have people available when it was being offered. Mm-hmm. And so to have something from ministry and church vocations similar to this, and be more than happy to set it up with the congregation and you and have it recorded and available. Mm-hmm. That would be great. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? We're on the home stretch, folks.
I was just going to say, I'm really leaving now. I actually am really leaving for my 11 o'clock. But thanks so much. It's been great to see you and hear your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Ross. Right. Great to have you in the mix.
Thanks, Ross. Yeah, we are. The end is near. So let's talk about one of the presbytery responsibilities. Presbyteries, who tracks all of this stuff? I mean, the question is who is responsible for making sure that an E&R applicant actually fulfills their conditions, their eligibility conditions? That responsibility falls to the presbyteries. But again, it's good for presbyteries to keep ministry and church vocations in the loop. We're it's always helpful for us to know if someone has completed their eligibility conditions, if someone has taken a sexual abuse and sexual harassment training. For that matter, if someone from one of our colleges has received the letter that comes out on February 1st and October 1st, granting a student who's been granted permission of the college to seek a call and they're graduating here, it's good for us at Ministry and Church Vocations to know this. So this gets to the communication issue. Eligibility recommendations have a shelf life. There is a time limit. They're good for 3 years from the date of the decision made by General Assembly, or in the case where E&R has power to issue, from the date that it makes its decision. Eligibility recommendations may be renewed upon application to education reception. So if someone has had about 2.5 years go by, and it looks like their eligibility is going to expire, they need to, if they want it extended, make an application to E&R requesting an extension. The renewal applications are not guaranteed. And if eligibility is renewed, any conditions attached to the original application still apply and must be completed. So if E&R has assigned Presbyterian Church polity, Presbyterian Church history, and additional coursework, a SASH training, those things still apply for a renewed application. Eligibility expires after 3 years where the applicant does not complete the required studies to fulfill the conditions, or where the applicant does not receive a call or an appointment to a ministry position in our denomination. And the applicant then must make a new application to the Committee on Education and Reception if their original application has expired. So we can have, for example, ministers from other denominations who are recommended, who are eligible to be received, and then we don't hear from them for 10 years, and then they apply for a position. Their application would expire after 3 years, and they would need to reapply, make a new application. Here's the one I always get asked about. Concerns about these recommendations. What if a presbytery has concerns about the committee's recommendation for a presbytery endorsed application? So presbytery thinks a particular candidate or a particular minister is absolutely fantastic, and the committee will assign perhaps additional coursework, or if the presbytery has any concerns about, or sometimes the committee will say no to an application. E&R has a long-standing policy of not giving reasons for its decisions. It never gives reasons for its decisions. And the principal reason for that is because the committee has been entrusted with a lot of confidential material and confidential references. And all of that material can and often does factor into the committee's decision, the decision behind the committee's recommendation. We don't want to burn our references. We want to make sure that the references are honest. And so we hold this stuff in confidence, and we don't give reasons for our decisions. However, if a presbytery does have sufficient concerns, strong enough concerns, then they can have representatives meet with the committee convener. The current convener is Ann Phillips, and the secretary of the committee, that's me. We can meet by video conference, and what will happen is we will go into listening mode, and the presbytery will share with us any new information that it has, anything that the committee may want to consider, and that may result in a revision of the recommendation. Not necessarily will, but it may. So we have that conversation, and the full committee then will consider it and make any decision about whether or not the recommendation should remain as it was originally made, or whether or not it would be made. The important thing about this in terms of the timing is that the appropriate time for the conversation to have is before the recommendation goes to General Assembly for approval. We've had some situations where presbyteries have known what the recommendation is through the competent objection letter, which gets sent out months ahead of time. When the report is first introduced on the floor of General Assembly, and commissioners from the Presbytery are invited to speak to the committee if they have any concerns. So there are opportunities for them to do it. Well, after the report, the recommendations are approved, it's pretty difficult to go from there. So make sure that this conversation happens before the recommendations go to General Assembly. And that is pretty much it. So unless there are other questions and comments about this or any of the previous material, if there's anything that's not clear, if there's anything that didn't make any sense, if there's anything to use Brian's question, what's the reason and the rationale behind this, in as much as I can, I'll try to answer that.
Tim, I was just wondering if we would have, I realize you're recording this, but the slides and kind of the way you've got the information just in point form available in some way as a quick reference guide. I've taken notes, but.
Yeah, no, I agree. That would be very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can certainly do that. One of the things that we're hoping to do is to get some of these presentations up on the MCV page of the website.
That'd be great.
For access. Yeah. So that's a good point.
Thank you. The other suggestion that I have, Tim, is that somehow, and I know this is often difficult, but somehow if we could have a 1 or 2 page rationale that sets this whole process, I think Rebecca mentioned this whole process into what are we trying to accomplish on behalf of the denomination? And you've referred to it several times, but I think almost as a preamble, something that could be up on the MCV website that we could refer to is what's the denomination attempting to accomplish in relationship to all of these regulations and requirements and restrictions and this, that, and the other thing, however people may perceive them. And so that would, I think that goes to the, what I wrote down, and I don't think you used the language, but what I wrote down as the whole piece about helping people become acculturated to the Presbyterian Church in Canada, where they desire and are being invited to contribute to that denomination's missioning. And just a kind of a tight rationale would help make sense, I think, of the whole process.
I think the bottom line and the tightest rationale that I could come up with is we are looking for the best possible candidates for ministry of word and sacrament through our candidacy process and through our education and reception process. And these are parts of and aspects of the overall discernment process for our denomination.
So I'm wondering whether this is a request, maybe a slide that would be added to the PowerPoint presentation at the beginning, just stating that.
Yeah.
Because that gives us something then to keep going back to as we use the resources in our presbyteries and congregations and what have you. Other than that, thank you so much for doing this. This is, I've been working with this process for years and I've learned all sorts of stuff that I should have known long ago.
Well, I hope it's been helpful. As I say, it makes our job at Ministry and Church Vocations easier to have presbyteries and students committees who are up to speed on and informed about the various aspects of the candidacy and the education and reception process. It certainly makes our job easier when interim moderators and search committees know.
Well, and I think hopefully this will get that kind of exposure. And I think Rebecca's idea of having the PowerPoint slides for people that don't have the time to kind of go through the podcast, video cast, whatever we're doing here, presentation would be great. And I'm assuming if people do have questions, then the best thing to do is just email you at Ministry and Church Vocations.
Absolutely. Get them all the time.
Tim,
happy to answer them.
Is it Tim.Purvis or Tim Purvis?
It's just T Purvis at Presbyterian.ca. So T Purvis, all one word, at Presbyterian.ca.
Great.
Just an aside, because of course, Brian and I are in the same presbytery. Brian, what do you think about the ministry committee being, maybe if you were to let Patty Eastwood know that this exists, because she would be one of the links to Interim Moderators.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So
No,
that they,
as
like
soon
if
as we get, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just thinking if we could, as my presbytery hat on, if we could pull from this the things pertinent to Interim Moderators as a little FAQ or.
I think that's a great idea. And Student Support and Certification Committee will do that.
Okay, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
One of my back burner projects as well is sort of an Interim Moderators 101 training, kind of like this.
Yeah, no kidding.
Well, because Tim, some of your, like, I'm aware now working with the students who are taking the different things assigned through E&R and coming, and I'm aware more and more of all the different ways that things go kind of off course, and it's so much more troublesome for the student to, like, it would just be better if the presbytery knew from the get-go what to do. Yeah.
And that is the purpose for designing this.
Exactly.
This and other workshops that I have, trainings that I have planned. As I say, it makes our job easier when presbyteries, are on top of this.
Yeah, and better for the students. They don't get confused.
Certainly.
Yeah.
And
thank you so much.
As you say, Tim, this technology is enabling us to do this kind of clarification and coordination much more effectively.
Mm-hmm. And it's just great to be able to say, what, do you want to do a quick Zoom call and I can answer your questions? Because sometimes to sort of do it in an email, it just works so much better. So Brian, a favor to ask of you, once you get the final product in the can, as it were, if you could send it along to me.
Oh, I certainly will. So what I'll do is send it by we usually send these big videos by AirBridge. And so it'll come, you can download it, save it, put it up on the MCV website. Rebecca, I think what I'll do is also send it to Victor, and so it can be sent out to the whole presbytery in follow up to that invitation we made. And then Tim, if you can send me the slides, and if you want to add that slide to the beginning, that would be great. Then I'll make sure that goes out here in the presbytery with the video.
Perfect. I don't know what kind of editorial hand you'll have to.
I don't. That's way beyond my pay grade. So it's going to come out as we did it. live from Toronto and Vancouver. It's Monday morning. Lydia, did you have any comments or questions?
No, it's fine. It's good. Just because I am the most recently ordained minister, but still it's confused many times. And because I'm dealing with a few international students, and also as a second English as a second language minister, sometimes I understand the difficulties and challenges that international students face, like even for guidance conference, whether they can candidates can express in their own language, or whether counselors can understand the cultural difference, all those things. But I trust the committee is doing excellent job, so it's good.
That raises a couple of issues I don't have in the presentation, but one of the things that happens during the education and reception process is that if we have a candidate whose first language isn't English, we will ask them if they would like a translator for the interview and arrange to have a translator present. Another question that we get quite frequently with respect to E&R applicants living outside the country, we get questions all of the time about immigration issues. Is there something that we can do to facilitate the immigration process? And one of the things that we have to say is that is really beyond the purview of the Education and Reception Committee. I mean, we are happy to provide a letter of endorsement or to assist an applicant's dealings with immigration. But strictly speaking, one of the things that we would recommend is, because the process is outside of our knowledge, to retain the services of an immigration lawyer or an immigration consultant. And a lot of that has been complicated by the pandemic as well. Because the rules and regulations have changed as the public health directives have changed. The other interesting thing with respect to coursework that's assigned to education and reception applicants, it used to be that they would have to physically travel to one of our theological colleges to do the coursework. Now, thanks to Zoom technology and the fact that in the last 2 years, practically everything that we've done has been forced online. The colleges are now offering their courses and a lot of the coursework online. And so we have education and reception applicants who are taking their history and their polity courses and other courses from where they are in whatever part of the world that they happen to be in. I mean, even if they have to get up at 3 a.m. to fire up their computers to take the course, they're able to do that. So it really is in some ways a brave new world, and we're figuring a lot of things out going forward. And that's going to be the story, I think, for so many aspects of the life of our denomination and our church.
Yeah.
The post-pandemic world that we're going to be moving into is going to be very, very different, and we're figuring it out as we go along.
Tim, your comments that's very helpful. And one of the things that crosses my mind is do we have, or are we thinking of developing a list of, and I'm thinking more of immigration consultants, but immigration lawyers might be good as well. I mean, I know there are a couple of ministers within our denomination who are immigration consultants, and there's probably far more than I know of. Would they be particularly helpful because they know the denomination? We can make sure that they know the process before they get on the list. But again, just to direct people to resources that would know the process that they're getting into.
And this is one area where I don't think we do keep a list at MCV. And like so many of the lists that we keep, it's a challenge to keep them updated.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Anyhow, something to consider. I think that would be helpful to people beginning this process. Well, Tim, let me say again on behalf of the Presbytery of Westminster, St. Andrew's Hall and Vancouver School of Theology, how much we appreciate you being with us, putting this together. And we hope that it's a blessing and a valuable resource to other presbyteries and congregations and colleges across the church. And Rebecca, I'm wondering if I can put you on the spot after another question, if you have one or comment, and pray us out.
Sure. I just wanted to say thank you. That's great. Thanks, Tim. Let's pray. Gracious God, we thank you for this time together and for the way that we're able to use technology to connect across great distances. And we pray for all that you are calling, all the people you're calling to exercise ministry within the Presbyterian Church in Canada, and for those candidates and how we can support them, Lord. We pray your Holy Spirit would be with us, guiding us in that endeavor. And it's all for the glory of Jesus. And so we pray in his name. Amen.
Amen.
Well, thank you all again for this opportunity to, I'm as excited as we Presbyterians can be about quality things, because this is important stuff to know. And so thank you for the opportunity to share it.
That's great. Tim, can you hang on? Oh, wait, let me stop the recording first.